Hi, my name is Dr. Pete Hilgartner, and today I want to talk a little bit about anti-aging and peak performance. Now, one of the things I'd like to clarify is that anti-aging is a misnomer. There's no such thing as anti-aging, because if you think about it, we're not going to stop time. Time and aging go hand in hand. But what we do want to do is we want to manage our aging. So the way I graph this is in most people's lives, if we use this as a timeline, and this is your ability to perform or function, most people are going along this line, and over time they drop down. And the paradox is the more they drop down, the more quickly they drop down. It has sort of that snowball effect. The ideal scene, from my perspective, is I would rather see people move along here and then one day, boom, drop down like that, okay? So the sharper we can make this angle, the better over time. So that's really the purpose of what we want to discuss today. In most cases, people are thinking anti-aging. If you do an internet search, you're going to come up with all sorts of creams and lotions and potions that make you look younger. I'm really not all that interested in that, because that's simply going to be a byproduct over time of balancing your aging and managing your aging process. You'll look better, you'll feel better, you'll function at a high level of capacity for a long period of time. So for most people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, that's actually more important than how they look. Although you might differ on that. Okay? But let's talk about what causes aging. What are the stresses that we're dealing with in life? There's really 4 stressors that everybody's dealing with in life. I'm going to break this down, I'm going to simplify it, and we can pick it apart even more, but I'm going to give you the big bullets. There's physical stress. There's chemical stress. And there's emotional, spiritual stress. Okay, physical stress. Physical stress would be things like a trauma or a series of traumas, postural strain or repetitive stress type of injuries. You do something over and over and over, and all of a sudden joints wear down. Those are going to be the physical stressors of life. It's basically the abuse to the physical structure of the body. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to resist that. The other one is going to be chemical. Now, most people think of chemical, they think of external chemical stressors, and they're accurate to think that, because you have to think things like pollutants, pesticides, food colorings, additives, preservatives. So we also need to address internal toxins. So we have exotoxins, meaning external. We have endotoxins, meaning internal. And the internal toxins are going to be the toxic chemicals that build up in your body. Usually we associate those with inflammation, but the toxic chemicals that build up in your body as a result of your normal metabolism, your normal processes on a cellular level, in relationship to your external environment. So moving on from the chemical, we go to the emotional, spiritual. Now, this may seem a little metaphysical for some of you, but there's a direct connection between the emotional, the psycho-emotional you, and your spiritual you, if you want to tie those two together. The psycho-emotional things are going to be associated with what I call the negative emotions. The negative emotions are the ones that are highly charged. I mean, there's very, very highly charged emotions. Love is a very highly charged emotion over here, and anger and resentment are over here. So there's a sliding scale. The farther you are down to the negative side, the more apt you're going to be to accumulate physical, chemical, and emotional stressors and the byproducts of that. It's going to accelerate your aging. So some of the emotional, spiritual stressors, anger, grief, resentment, judgment, jealousy. Those are going to be the things that will actually physiologically change how your cells are dividing and the normal metabolism. So the more we can release that, and we're going to talk about how we do that in this course, the more we can release those emotions, the freer we are to now handle the various stressors of life. All right, so let's spend a little bit of time talking about the physical and structural. I'm going to break this down a little bit more for you. The one thing that I like people to understand is that your body, on all the dynamics, acts as a single synchronized functional unit. What I mean by that is you can't separate any one component from the others. If you have a chemical response to something, you have an emotional and a physical response at the exact same time. So we have to look at this, that the body is synchronized. It's a single synchronized functional unit. If I hurt my elbow, I have an effect throughout the entire body instantly. If you ever want to test this theory, go take your shoes off, slam your foot into the wall like you would stubbing your toe, and instantly you're going to have a physical, you're going to have a chemical, and you're going to have a pretty significant emotional response, usually reflected in an expletive. Okay? So if you've ever done that, you've instantly, you've experienced exactly what I'm talking about. Okay? The chemical is how your toe gets all swollen and red. That's a chemical reaction. Okay? So we have to understand that the entire system works as one unit. Now, there's a feedback mechanism going on in your brain. This is what causes life to actually happen. And it's mediated by your central nervous system. Your central nervous system is your brain, your spinal cord, and the spinal nerves. Okay? So nothing happens in your body unless there has been a command issued by the brain through the spinal cord, through the spinal nerves, out to the various tissues, and then a feedback loop coming back. So one of the biggest equations that your brain is always trying to solve is how effectively you're relating to gravity. So gravity and taxes are two of the forces that we're probably never going to escape, okay? So what we want to do is we want to help your brain solve that problem of how to optimally resist gravity. So here's what your brain is constantly doing. It's trying to figure out, how do I keep my eyes level to the horizon? How do I keep my body underneath me for maximal resistance to gravity so I have minimal energy output? If you remember from 9th grade biology, everything goes to the lowest energy state, okay? So if we understand that that equation is what your brain is constantly running, that equation influences how well you digest, how well you breathe, how well your heart and cardiopulmonary system work. It even influences your mood, your attitude, and your emotions, your hormones, okay? So it's all about the central nervous system and the body intertwined in how optimally you relate to gravity. The primary stressor that we're just never going to escape. Remember, I spoke about the stressors of life, the physical, chemical, emotional, spiritual, but the physical stress that you're never going to escape unless you become an astronaut and go hang out in space is going to be gravity. So everything has to be looked at in that context. So what we do, and this is pretty cutting edge stuff. Some of you have had chiropractic care, some of you have never had chiropractic care, some of you believe in chiropractors, some of you don't. I tell people all the time, it's not a belief system, it's not a theology, it's not a philosophy, other than the philosophy of what I've just explained, that the body works as a single synchronized functional unit, the brain and the central nervous system run everything, but here's the problem. If I all of a sudden got little shorts in the circuitry, my system is not going to work optimally. The feedback mechanism is not going to work optimally. So if I look at the spine, this gives you kind of a visual of what's going on. So for years, chiropractors and osteopaths have been saying that a bone out of place pinches the nerve or knocks down blood supply or any of that, and all these little nerves are what go feed the organs, cells, and tissues of the body. Well, they've been correct in the assessment that any kind of a misalignment in here will either excite that area or it will inhibit. It'll knock down the flow. Either way, it's kind of like having a light bulb out here on a Christmas tree that's not getting enough energy or it's getting too much energy. The light bulb is either going to blow or it's going to dim, and over time even the dim one is going to blow before it would normally in its normal lifespan. Okay, so the function of what we want to do is we want to try to optimize the balance between the structure and the function of the central nervous system. Now, with what I do, and this is taking the physical modalities, the chiropractic, the osteopathy, the physical therapy to the next level. This is like applying quantum physics relative to Newtonian physics, okay? So if you know anything about that, Newtonian physics, apples fall from the tree, there's things that have equal and opposite reactions, all that works. And Newtonian physics may be enough to get me from Earth to the moon, but it probably won't get me home. With quantum physics, we expand the data set. All of a sudden, I can go beyond Mars. All right, so that's where we are right now. And what we're using is information that was gleaned from a neurosurgeon in Sweden named Alf Brigg, B-R-E-I-G, if you want to look it up. What Dr. Brigg found is that our structural mechanics, if you're like this, your structural mechanics really have very little to do with the bones, ligaments, muscles, tendons, and joints. In fact, the bones, ligaments, muscles, tendons, joints are a reflection. This is a result of what he called meningeal tension. If I pulled your brain and your spinal cord out of here, all I would have is a brain and a spinal cord. It's a tissue that's 78% fatty tissue. So it should hang straight down. However, it won't. It's going to twist, it's going to torque, and it's overall going to either bend to the left or to the right. And that's a function of the covering of the brain and the spinal cord called the meninges. If you've heard of meningitis, you understand the meningitis is an inflammation of that covering. Okay? But here's how that covering works. Think of it as kind of like a Spider-Man suit. It's kind of like my sweater. My sweater would represent the meningeal sleeve, my body would represent the spinal cord, and my head would represent the brain. The meningeal sleeve is attached inside here to the spinal cord, okay, so it's attached to my skin with little attachments. It's also attached into the spinal column with little ligaments. And what happens is it's like a rubber band. It runs up the back, it wraps around, and it attaches right behind my face. So if I take this thing and I stretch it, what happens to the attachment behind the face? It gets twisted, okay? So what Dr. Brigg found is that as a result of the physical, chemical, and emotional stressors of our life, we accumulate tension, twist, and torque on the meningeal sleeve. That, combined with bones moving into a position that the body cannot fix because there's no counterleavering force, is what leads people to where they are. Now, structurally, where they are. Now, what we're going to talk about later on in the program is how that applies to things like osteoarthritis, cancer, heart disease, and a number of other problems that are facing Americans today. So I want to give a context right now of how all of this works, how it interrelates, okay? So again, if I have this kind of structure, and I understand the central nervous system and the spinal cord and the feedback mechanism of the nervous system, how that works, I can tell you that there's all kinds of little glitches in the system that are going to increase or decrease nerve flow. Either way, the system is out of balance. So if we're going to manage aging, what we really need to do is we need to learn to manage the various systems of the body. Symptoms are not the way we want to handle this. We want to balance systems. Symptoms are nothing but a function of imbalanced systems. All right, in this segment, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about how we're actually going to manage our aging. We talked about aging as a timeline thing. You're not going to stop the timeline, but if you can manage the factors that influence the degeneration of your body over time, that's what my goal is. It's managed aging to allow peak performance over time. Okay? So let's look at this. We know that life is nothing but a function of physical, chemical, emotional, and spiritual stressors. How many of you have gone to a doctor and they say, well, you have to reduce stress in your body or in your life? And you think, okay, well, tell me something I don't know, okay? But we treat stress like stress is a bad thing. Here's the reality on stress. Without stress, we don't grow. Without stress, we don't get smart. Without stress, we can't handle anything. In fact, if we look at it in the plant world, if I have a little plant sitting in the ground and it experiences its first big storm, what do you think that little plant does? The first thing that plant does as soon as the storm goes by is it digs its little taproot deeper. That's an adaptation. So stress is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, the only way you get smarter, faster, or stronger is by challenging and stressing your body. So we have to look at life as stress. But stress is never bad nor good. It's what your body does with the stress that leads to an outcome. All right? So let's go over to your body. We all know it's genetic. And we know we get half from mom and half from dad, and what? We're pretty well screwed, right, in most people's minds, okay? That's called genetic determinism. We all learned that in biology class. In fact, unfortunately, they're still teaching that. However, that's wrong. You do get half from mom and half from dad, and that leads to what we call your genotype. That's the genes that you came into this world with. But your genotype does not necessarily mean that's going to be your phenotype. What I mean by that is, let's say you have all sorts of different genes, and some of those genes would say, okay, this person's going to be a weak, frail person with a weak immune system. Well, with the understanding of our new, what I call our new biology, we understand by applying quantum physics theory to cellular biology that no, this is in fact not true. You do get half from mom, half from dad. You come into this world with a certain set of genes. But it's how your genetics interact with your life, the stresses of life, that lead to what we call your phenotype. If you want to understand what phenotype means, go look in the mirror. Your phenotype is who and what you are right now. And that's a result over time of either adaptation or compensation to the stresses of life. Now, where we get a little bogged down mentally is people think that adaptation and compensation are synonymous. They think they mean the same thing. They do not. And adaptation is actually a growth phase. If I weightlift, and I weightlift just enough to create enough stimulus into my central nervous system says grow. If I weightlift too much, and some of you have probably experienced this, if I work out too much, too frequently, and I don't allow enough recovery, what happens? I get injured. My body says, hey, I'm going to rob Peter to pay Paul, and I am going to do something. It makes me less functional, and here's the paradox. I'm going to drop this down here. The more I compensate, the less adaptable I become. The more I have to compensate, the less adaptable I become. And you see how that goes. And if you go back to my original graph, this is how most of us go. And the paradox is, the more I do this, the more I'm going to do this. Okay, it's the snowball effect. So, what we need to talk about is and we were all taught, I'll say incompletely, okay, but really it's untrue. We were taught that it's nature versus nurture. Remember, there's that raging debate, and it's been going on all since probably before Darwin, of nature versus nurture. How about nature via nurture? This is the new biology. It is your genotype, your genetics, interacting and either adapting or compensating over time to your environment. So you cannot control what mom and dad gave you. That's done, right? That blueprint was set. However, you can control this. and how that's going to allow your phenotype, who you are 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now, to change. Okay? So if you don't like where you are, you're going to have to do something different in order to get a different outcome. Because really all we're looking at, what you're looking at here, is an outcome
over time of certain actions.
Certain actions based on certain beliefs. Those certain beliefs were based on certain conditioning. All right? So if you don't like your outcomes, let's go back and let's look at the beliefs. Let's look at the conditioning. I can't change the conditioning. Okay? That's the past. But I can change me. I can change my perspective. I can change my beliefs so that I set myself on a different trajectory over time, if that makes sense. So how do we manage the stresses of life? How do we manage them so we do less compensating and more adapting? Some of you may find that you've got a lot of catching up to do. Okay? So here's the formula. The formula is we have to look at structure. We have to look at nutrition, exercise, rest, attitude, and finally, we are doing nothing but managing an energy system. When you take your car in to get repaired, or you have the HVAC guy come out to check your heating and air conditioning in your house, you're managing an energy system in response to a set of symptoms. If you have certain symptoms, and we all do as we get older, well, not if you do my program, you won't, but we all experience certain symptoms, and we go in and we treat those symptoms. However, we're not balancing out the systems of the body. It's an energetic system. You are an electrochemical system. The moment that your body, your life expires, your cells begin to break down. The moment your life expires and that energy that makes you who you are, you can call it your chi, your soul, your prana, Tao, whatever, the life force, the universal intelligence. This is not a theological or philosophical statement. It's quantum physics. But the moment that energy, that life force leaves your body, and it doesn't emanate through that central nervous system, your body starts to break down instantly. It does this in an accelerated manner. Okay? So we need to break these down, and many of you have heard pieces of this. How much conflicting data have you read or learned about just in nutrition? Okay? There's all these diets, everything from the Atkins diet to Dean Ornish way over here, or the Pritikin diet, which is all grain, no meat, vegetarian, vegan, whatever, and all over here to some people who are saying, oh, all you want to eat is fat and meat, okay? What's right? Well, here's the reality. You're an individual. We don't know exactly what's right, but we know certain principles that are more balanced in terms of what is best for overall human physiology. But what's right for you has to be determined specific for you, and that's one of the unique things that we offer.